Goals, dreams, moving forward. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. No one can tell about us better than ourselves. Watch the block of programs of TV BRICS International Network on Umtala TV, South Africa.
As a very young man, when he was just starting his journey as a writer, he wrote these wonderful words. Man is a mystery. It needs to be unraveled. And if you spend your whole life unraveling it, don't say that you've wasted time. I'm studying that mystery because I want to be a human being. This phrase, man is a mystery, it is absolute. It is absolute for everyone, regardless of nationality, gender, age, financial status, disability, etc. Every person is a mystery. Sometimes foreigners confirm this, but actually, it is mostly Russians themselves who say, it's something only we can understand. It's the Russian soul, after all. No, Dostoevsky is absolutely a global writer in every sense of the word. He does write about the Russian soul, yes, but actually, it is the human soul he studies. And we get a little bit arrogant when we say, well, we can't be understood, it's just a Russian thing, a purely Russian thing. No, it's not like that.
He writes not just about Russia and Russians or about suffering of some Russian people, but generally about human suffering and searching for oneself. About a human who is torn between good and evil, light and darkness, yes and no, God and the devil. Being torn by those passions, he both in his weakness and strength takes some steps, tries to find himself, talks to himself and others.
For what is the power of the spirit of Russian nationality, if not its aspiration after the final goal of universality and omni-humanity?
小小姐等于在中文就 class service 对就是呢你起了很多你都没用但我知道
As many of my generation, in youth, I was an avid literature lover and even wrote my own stories. And Russian literature is a great phenomenon. That is why I decided to read it in its original language. Dostoevsky is one of those authors who made the strongest impression on me. The most significant work I have done associated with him is my participation as an editor of the first collected edition of Dostoevsky's works in Chinese in 22 volumes. Dostoevsky became a huge figure as a writer. Whether you like him or not, he is everywhere in literature. Moreover, he's not just a literary figure. He's the summit of literature. There are very few authors like him who are capable of describing the depths of the human soul and inner experiences. He's like a therapist. As a doctor who can detect illnesses in the human body, Dostoevsky sees illnesses of the soul. In his novels, he described the processes taking place in the subconscious of a person and in the mind of a madman.
Good heavens. What do you want? Who are you?
Hello, Alyona Ivanovna.
Who are you? What are you? My dear.
Why, Alyona Ivanovna, you know me, Raskolnikov. Here. I brought you the pledge I promised the other day. Here.
What is it?
A thing. Cigarette case. Silver. Take it. Take it.
It doesn't seem somehow like silver. How he has wrapped it up.
Divine truth and justice, the earthly law, claim their rights. And you'll end by being compelled to give yourself up. Compelled. So that even if you perish in penal servitude, nonetheless, you might once again be united to men. For more than 30 years, I've been admiring Fyodor Dostoevsky's works. I'm holding the Crime and Punishment book. I translated it into Tamil language myself. This is the best novel in the world and my favorite book by Dostoevsky. The plot of Crime and Punishment is unique. No other author was able to measure up to this level of creativity. The way Dostoevsky reveals the characters of this book is just fascinating. For me, Crime and Punishment is like a tattoo on the heart. I read it in Brazil at the age of 20 and understood almost nothing back then. Nonetheless, I was amazed by the student Raskolnikov, who was expelled because he couldn't pay for his education. I was impressed with his ability to think philosophically and reason about the eternal issues of the world. It felt like, as Nikolai Gogol said, hammering a nail into the head. So Crime and Punishment became such a nail for me. It went through my head, got to my heart, and left an indelible mark there. I made a film based on Dostoevsky's works. It's called Hey Ram. The plot of that film is similar to that of Crime and Punishment. The antagonist in the film resembles Raskolnikov. His ideas and attitudes turn out to be utopian. And then the hero realizes how wrong he has been. This masterpiece has shown me how a person who has committed a crime realizes his guilt. I love the entire Pentateuch, but Crime and Punishment and its polyphony, in the way several events are happening simultaneously, and how it is all brought together, how it's all created, it's a real gem. What would I personally recommend from Dostoevsky? It'll be Crime and Punishment and Humiliated and Insulted. These two works reflect the unprecedented depth of human psychology, unpredictability of human destiny, and contemplation about it in the face of death, before God. Dostoevsky was the first author in the world literature who wrote a polyphonic novel. What does it mean? Before, when an author wrote a novel, they could cover it entirely and decide each character's destiny as they wish. Love them if I wish, kill them if I want to. But Dostoevsky sometimes loosens control over his characters. In other words, his characters don't just have some kind of goal, but he as the author also engages in a dialogue with them. And this polyphony is Dostoevsky's indisputable contribution to the world's literature and writer's craft. He does not command or control his characters, does not single any of them out, quite the opposite. He wants to convey different points of view through them. Each of them is permissible, just and possible. There's no right or wrong, no single correct scenario. He seeks to give everyone their say, the most insignificant ones as well as the most powerful ones. His works are not like our classical literature. Traditionally, each piece has its main theme, and all the details come to be in accordance with this main theme, with the main idea. But as famous Russian literary critic Mikhail Bakhtin said, Dostoevsky writes a dialogue novel or a polyphonic novel. It means that each of Dostoevsky's characters has a mind of their own. Each character has their own thoughts and reflections. They are not consistent with each other. They are not placed in the single frame and do not express a uniform idea. Each character has their own opinion. So it all turns into a kind of discussion. As a result, it is the reader who determines the moral of the story, not the author.
In Dostoevsky's works, there are many characters that cause hatred in people. All these unpleasant characters take up most of the pages. But there are no absolute villains in his pieces. He couldn't write a bad person that is totally beyond redemption. Older Karamazov is just like that. He has an ill temper, but in mental shock state, he realizes that hell does exist. He has no illusions about himself. As for natural evil, there's lots of it. Remember Stavrogin or the Karamazov family, or Rogozhin, the character from The Idiot, or Svidrigailov from Crime and Punishment. All of these people are villains by their nature. Where did they get it from? We don't know. Are they happy about it? No, they aren't. Deep down, nobody wishes for such evil. In fact, in the Russian literature, we see that if a person can assess their actions in clear mind and repent, then there is no such crime a confession won't set them free of. Any crime can be atoned for. This is one of the features of the Russian literature. Until a person breathes their last breath, they can't be issued with a final verdict.
For me, Dostoevsky is a rather sharp form. It's not clownery, not at all. I'd say he's rather all about being on edge. This is a kind of intonation I hear from him, a kind of haughty yet tearful intonation, as if people feel very bad, but with every last drop of strength, they try to live. Some people see a kind of never-ending melancholy, or even something sick in his works, and people are annoyed by those ideas. I reckon he is a hypersensitive artist, just like Van Gogh, something like that. He's very bright and emotional. Very emotional because he created such types as Mitya Karamazov or Svidrigailov and other incredible characters. If you asked me who would I like to play, I'd say I probably want to play them all. Rogozhin is an awesome part as well as Mishkin. They all really stand out. They're masterfully written characters. They are like a treat for an actor. Whoever you may be, if you exist. And if anything more rational than what is happening here is possible, suffer it to be here now. I made this appeal and held my peace. There was a full minute of unbroken silence. And again another drop fell. And behold, my grave suddenly was rent asunder.
Among the Russian writers, Russian classics, Dostoevsky is the most Western writer. Because besides philosophy, psychology, and his depth, Dostoevsky has very exciting detective plots. And this is very interesting for Western readers. So they follow the plot, the characters, and this way they get excited and immerse themselves into reading Dostoevsky.
As he created many of his works in order to pay back his gambling debts, he was compelled to write well and interesting. Otherwise, his novels wouldn't sell. His texts have many psychological details. Thoughts that form foundation of his works are very deep. They're like philosophical treatises or theological teachings or works on human psychology. Think of it. Now with the rack and tortures and so on, you suffer terrible pain and wounds. And all of that, perhaps, may distract you from soul anguish. But then, your torture is bodily pain only until you die. But here, the most terrible part of the whole punishment is not the bodily pain at all, but the certain knowledge that in an hour, then in 10 minutes, then in half a minute, then now, this very instant, your soul must quit your body, and that you will no longer be a man, and that this is certain. That's the point, the certainty of it. Just that instant when you place your head on the block and hear the iron grate over your head. That quarter of a second is the most awful of all. Who dares to say that any man can suffer this without going mad? Doubtless, there may be men who have been sentenced, who have suffered this mental anguish for a while, and then have been reprieved. Our Lord Christ spoke of this anguish and dread. No. No man should be treated so. What has left me with the deepest impression from Dostoevsky's biography was the events of 1849. That year, he was arrested, and even more so, sentenced to death for participating in a revolutionary movement. Not long before the day of execution, the emperor pardoned him and exiled him to Siberia. This person had a unique experience. He was the one who lived in anticipation of impending death. All this left a very deep imprint on Dostoevsky's personality and was reflected in his works. It is very important for true writers to clearly define what they see. Pain is pain, love is love, oppression is oppression. The questions that Dostoevsky raised were in line with what we went through in our country, what we went through as the entire nation. True writers can motivate people to be true to their craft and their observations. Of course, after exile, you learn such things about people and yourself that it is scary to talk about it with others. Dostoevsky turned out to be quite fearless. Fearless. My mother-in-law survived the siege of Leningrad, and she never spoke about the siege. It was dreadful. And, for instance, whenever there was something about the siege on TV, always using a victorious narrative, yes, rightfully victorious, but never having the adequate level of sorrow, she would switch the TV off or just leave the room, because it was all untrue, but it was very difficult to face the truth, and Dostoevsky looks into this truth. Dostoevsky spent only 11 days in Tobolsk, in a transit prison, where a truly fateful meeting occurred. He met the Decembrists' wives, who gave him the gospel that lay under his pillow for 4 years in the Omsk prison, and then it remained his handbook for 30 years, from 1850 and until the day he died. On the day of his death, here in his study, he was reading fortune on what destiny awaited him. He randomly opened the gospel at the page where Jesus tells John the Baptist, "Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness." And he told his wife, "You see, let it be so now. I am about to die." Dostoevsky and other convicts would come to this temple to pray. He once said his Hosanna went through terrible trials. In Omsk, he saw so much injustice, faced such pain, such cruelty, that his faith was constantly put to test. The Gospel was the only book allowed in prison. When opening the Gospel, one wasn't allowed to make notes or write anything. He marked things he found most important with his nail on the margins. He spent 4 years in Omsk, from 1850 to 1854. He was deprived of all the rights already on Semyonovsky Platz, and he ceased to be a person with any civil rights. His head was half-shaved, his legs were shackled. Those shackles couldn't be taken off, even for a moment. These shackles were made upon our request. They are similar to what Dostoevsky would wear when he went to work or stayed in a hospital. As Dostoevsky wrote, these shackles weighed 4 to 5 kilograms, and it is also confirmed by the documents. In order to avoid these fetters tearing the skin off the legs, convicts would make those special underfetters. They were made from pigskin. Convicts would put them on their legs, which helped to soften the weight and hardness of this iron. He was surrounded by people that greeted him with hatred because he was a nobleman and a retired military officer, whereas the majority of convicts had committed crimes against landlords and officers. So for them, Dostoevsky was an enemy. The first months of hard labor in prison were really terrible and dangerous for him. He could have died at any moment. When headed to the prison, unaware of what awaited him in Omsk, Dostoevsky wrote that life's primary task is to be a human among the people and to forever remain as one. He never asked for any concessions. He tried to help the arrestees, even if they hated Dostoevsky. He tried to help them during work. He taught convicts to read and write. He helped them to stage a play in prison. Dostoevsky found answers to many questions in Omsk. Dostoevsky is the writer who really speaks to all the humiliated and insulted, miserable and cast out. The most remarkable in his art is a deep concern about the human, the humanity of every one of us. Dostoevsky has lots of love to every living being. The first thing I learned, thanks to Dostoevsky, is that you have to respect the others. This is absolutely fundamental. No one is superior to the other. Everyone is equal.
Dostoevsky writes about us. He writes about the most painful problems of our existence. And getting to know Dostoevsky, we get to know this world, we get to know ourselves, we get to know fellow humans, and we learn to accept and love them as they are. I learned for myself that you shouldn't judge people. You shouldn't mindlessly say harsh words to people. You don't have a right for this. Nobody has it. Don't judge people, even if the person has hit rock bottom, because being at the bottom is unbearable. Therefore, you shouldn't judge anyone. That's exactly what I understood for myself after reading Dostoevsky.
Dostoevsky always insists the value of love.
Fyodor Dostoevsky tries to teach us to love and be patient. The author proves to us that love is stronger than anything else. This is why I consider him the best writer in history. In terms of subject matter and narrative form, Dostoevsky has had a tremendous influence on the literature of all countries. The 1950s and 1960s were the period when Africa fought for its independence. And the leaders of the national liberation movement used to read particular literature. That was the time the influence of Russian writers began to spread. Dostoevsky has had a huge impact on our cultural heritage and on South African authors. One of his books, Humiliated and Insulted, turned out to be very dear to our writers, such as Eskia Mpahiele and Nat Nakasa. We're talking about those who are able to remain faithful to their views and beliefs from a political point of view. After all, we went through apartheid and colonization, and in this sense, Dostoevsky has helped South African authors a lot. They reflect on the problems raised in his books in the context of their own national culture.
It is very comforting in terms of my knowledge of Dostoevsky as well.
Dostoevsky has indirectly influenced entire generations of writers, first one, and then the following ones, including those who are appreciated even currently. The obvious point of reference is South African writer J.M. Coetzee and his novel, The Master of Petersburg, published in 1994. This book curiously shows the intertwining of the political and the personal. J.M. Coetzee's widespread popularity and his dominant position in literary circles has largely influenced the fact that Dostoevsky became the center of attention in South African literature.
Let us name several authors Dostoevsky has had serious influence on. For instance, Franz Kafka and his novel The Metamorphosis. Nietzsche's philosophy and his Superman theory were also significantly influenced by Dostoevsky. Another author who has had the same level of influence as Dostoevsky is Freud. Freud had learned a lot from Dostoevsky's works, and later he used what he learned as a foundation in his teachings on psychoanalysis. Dostoevsky not only inspired all these authors to philosophical ideas, but at the same time, through them, he had a tremendous impact on the entire global literature. In general, if we talk about Western literature and the person who has had the most significant influence on it, this person would be Dostoevsky.
Tell me, will you be here long? Can't you go away?
расстроены нервы.
Your nerves are out of order. You are angry with me, even for being able to catch cold. Though I was hurrying then to a diplomatic soiree at the house of a lady of high rank in Petersburg who was aiming at influence in the ministry. Well, an evening suit, white tie, gloves. Though I was God knows where. I had to fly through space to reach your Earth. Of course, it took only an instant, but, you know, a ray of light from the sun takes full 8 minutes. And fancy, in an evening suit and open waistcoat. Spirits don't freeze. But when one's in fleshly form, well, in brief, I didn't think. And set off. And you know, in those ethereal spaces, there's such a frost. At least one can't call it frost. You can fancy 150 degrees below zero. You know, the game the village girls play, they invite the unwary to lick an axe in 30 degrees of frost. The tongue instantly freezes to it, and the dupe tears the skin off so it bleeds. But that's only in 30 degrees. In 150 degrees, I imagine it would be enough to put your finger on the axe, and it would be the end of it. If only there could be an axe there. And can there be an axe there? An axe? Yes. What would become of an axe there? Well, what would become of an axe in space? Well, if it were to fall to any distance, it would begin, I think, flying round the Earth without knowing why, like a satellite. That's all. Fib more cleverly, or I won't listen. But I'm not fibbing. The truth is unhappily hardly ever amusing. Is there a God or not? Here. Here.
Бог есть или нет?
Upon my word, I don't know. I think. Therefore, I am. The rest to me is unproven. Dostoevsky's true masterpiece is a novel that was created here in this house, in this flat, in this study we're sitting next to right now, the brothers Karamazov.
В этом доме, в этой квартире, в этом кабинете, около которого мы сейчас с вами находимся, это братья Карамазовы.
I read Karamazov Brothers more than 10 times.
I read the Brothers Karamazov more than 10 times, perhaps even more. There are 2 translations of this book into the Tamil language, one from Russian, another one from English, and both publications became bestsellers in Tamil Nadu state. Every year, 2,000 people buy Dostoevsky's novels in our state. From the beginning, the plot of the novel seems easy, but the further you read, the more complicated the story gets. The reason behind this work is incredibly strong. Dostoevsky tried to show that human suffering is like a tunnel. If you go through it with dignity, you can become a better version of yourself. Realize your values and learn to make the right decisions. Suffering is the path to cleansing. This is what Dostoevsky wanted to say. For I mean to go on in my sins to the end. Let me tell you, for sin is sweet. All abuse it, but all men live in it. Only others do it on the sly, and I openly. And your paradise, Alexei, is not to my taste, and it's not the proper place for a gentleman, your paradise, even if it exists. I believe that I fall asleep and don't wake up again, and that's all. You can pray for my soul if you like, and if you don't want to, don't, damn you. But the worst of it is, you do not realize yourself that you respond to some inner prompting to do something disgraceful, in order that you might say to yourself, there, I've done a new act of shame. I'm a degraded creature.
You are all dear to me. Boys, from this day forth, I have a place in my heart for you all. And I beg you to keep a place in your hearts for me. Well, and who has united us in this kind, good feeling, which we shall remember and intend to remember all our lives? Who, if not Ilyusha, the good boy, the dear boy, precious to us forever? Let us never forget him. May his memory live forever in our hearts from this time forth. The Brothers Karamazov is my favorite novel, and it has made the deepest impression on me. I believe that this book gives the readers a philosophical view of the world. It gives an understanding that a person needs faith and love in order to live a full life. And that is what all of us, people, should learn to do, to learn faith and love. Of course, it sounds a bit idealistic, and there are plenty of obstacles and human flaws. But we have to remember it. I'm talking about Alyosha's final speech in the novel. From mutual hatred to mutual love and faith in each other and mutual help. I wrote an article about this novel, where I described my impression from reading The Brothers Karamazov. This book is about the need for humanity to get closer. When Brazilians find out that I'm Russian, the first thing they usually say to me is, "Oh, Russia, Dostoevsky." Therefore, Dostoevsky is the most popular writer in Brazil. He is being read. For instance, a painter was renovating my house, painting the walls, and during his breaks, while the paint was drying, he read Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. So he's being read by absolutely everyone. I am given more opportunities because I'm Russian and I was born in Dostoevsky's country. He motivates students incredibly, and motivation is essential. You know, when students start studying the Russian language, I ask them at the very first class, why have you, Brazilians, decided to study the Russian language? And a huge number tell me, I decided to study the Russian language because I read Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, or The Brothers Karamazov. In April of 2019 at our University of São Paulo, we had a teleconference, 3 cities in Dostoevsky's destiny. We held this incredibly successful teleconference together with TV BRICS. We were set a difficult task. How does one explain to those who don't speak Russian the entire depth of Dostoevsky? Then we had this wonderful thought to tell about 2 things at once, about the Russian language and about Dostoevsky. There are so many different nuances in the Russian language which foreigners find very challenging. They get especially confused when they learn that the meaning of the word depends on the prefix. I mean, it may change to a completely opposite one, and at times it's difficult to tell apart рождение, birth, перерождение, rebirth, and возрождение, revival, that are the key to understanding the life of Dostoevsky. So we began to introduce these three fundamental words, starting from the word root rod, family, родители, parents. We told about Dostoevsky's family, that he was born in Moscow, that his rebirth is linked with our city of Omsk, that here he did his hard work on himself, that he didn't perish nor break, but rather he was reborn in a new quality. And the third word, возрождение, revival, again, we explained the new meaning of the prefix. We said that this rising from the ashes, pushing up from the bottom, and becoming a completely new writer. It was all meant to happen in St. Petersburg. First of all, Dostoevsky attracts them with his emotional diversity. As Brazilians are extremely emotional people, during the teleconference, they pointed out what Russians and Brazilians have in common. It's this emotional openness, sometimes the explosion of feelings, and emotional Dostoevsky, with his powerful depth, pulls them in because they want to understand the source of these emotions. They find its echo within themselves.
Here we have the fogs and rains. Here we have cold sunrises. Here on the path we never walked. Intricate plots expect us. In general, the problems of translation are very interesting, because here in Russia, we proudly say that Dostoevsky is translated into all the languages of the world. But then you begin to think, what do people actually read there in those translations? How were the books translated? There are so many different kinds of translations, hence the different attitudes. In the 20s and 30s, the world starts actively studying Dostoevsky. He gets translated in Europe and other countries. The first Chinese translation of Dostoevsky had a review by Mao Dun. The headline said, Dostoevsky is a thinker. In other words, from the moment he appeared in our country, the Chinese public saw him not just as a writer. Subsequently, after the new China was formed, Dostoevsky remained in the shadow for a long time. The reason was the Soviet Union's view of him. Back then, he was considered a reactionary and unprogressive writer. They didn't read his books, and this attitude was transferred over to the Chinese. Up until I went to get my postgrad, there was a dual perspective on Dostoevsky. On the one hand, his works were read, but on the other hand, it was advised against reading him. Such attitude fed into the fact that his book sales skyrocketed after the new reforms and openness policy were implemented. Because, as we know, if some author gets forbidden, his popularity will certainly grow. In the past, Dostoevsky's works weren't read much. Now they are read with great pleasure and enthusiasm. This is why he has become the most popular Russian writer in China today. For instance, I heard that in one of the Chinese universities, a teacher who doesn't even know the Russian language nor Russian literature teaches a subject called Psychology of Crime and Punishment. I believe that right now in China, it is the best period for reading Dostoevsky, because now you can get an unbiased look at his works. One can perceive him as a writer, as a master of realism, as a philosopher, as a theologian, as a psychologist. When I was an intern at the Moscow State University and was already fluent in Russian, I decided to read Crime and Punishment again. I read this book in Brazil in Rosario Fusco's translation. He was a skilled professional, and the translation itself was excellent, but it was a translation from French. In Moscow, I took the book in Russian and the Portuguese translation. I compared it to the original and concluded that this isn't Dostoevsky. The language and narration were too linear, when the true Dostoevsky style can't stand linearity. Right then, after comparing the original and the translation, I got the idea of translating Crime and Punishment again upon my return to Brazil. It was the first book by Dostoevsky that I translated. He was translated to most languages not from Russian, but from French, meaning that the translation was indirect, and these first versions can still be met everywhere, not just in university libraries. One can't claim that one translation is better than the other. But at the example of the French translation, we see a certain desire to embellish the original author's text. So the character who speaks illiterately uses vernacular language or foreign words, and the French version turns out to be slick and embellished. It is not at all the same as the original. This became especially noticeable on the example of Dostoevsky's translations. Each of his characters has their own characteristics and their intrinsic speech style. For instance, the mistakes in character speech are very figurative. Therefore, when a direct translation was finally completed, original characters, hitherto unknown, appeared before our readers.
My students read Dostoevsky in Portuguese. It is only recently that the first direct translations of Dostoevsky from Russian into Portuguese have begun to appear. It has started around 50 years ago when they began to translate Dostoevsky. Compared to what was happening with French or English, those are relatively recent translations. Now, practically all of his works have been translated. The Pentateuch, of course, and all the big novels.
In our museum fund, we have Dostoevsky's collected works, published in 1963 in Rio de Janeiro. Collected works is a certain outcome. It is a result of the previous translation work. I want to speak to at least one person as I would to myself. Get up. Get up at once.
Are you happy? Are you happy? Say this one word. Are you happy now? Today? This moment? What did she say?
Be calm. Be calm. Get up. Get up.
I'm going away tomorrow as you bade me. I won't write. This is the last time I shall see you. The last time. Goodbye.
Poor idiot. What on earth will become of him now? He's not in love. He's happy in another way.
My favorite Dostoevsky's novel is The Idiot. And my dream is to go to space. I hope it will come true. And I always think that if I can take only one masterpiece of the world literature with me, then I would like to take Dostoevsky's The Idiot. To fly into space with The Idiot, with Prince Mishkin.
I read Dostoevsky's stories for the first time when I was 11 or 12 years old. His work seemed amazing to me. They changed my worldview. Such writers as Dostoevsky will always influence authors and artists around the world. Though 200 years have passed since the day of his birth, I'm convinced that in the future even more people will want to read his novels. Dostoevsky occupies an incredibly important place, not only in the Russian culture, but throughout the world. He has had a significant impact on the development of Chinese literature, on taste in literature of the Chinese people, and broadening their horizons. He inspired the Chinese to take off the blinkers and liberate their thinking.
Dostoevsky's key value is that he can be read by people of different generations, and they will always find something for themselves, which is why I say that his works are immortal.
For me, the most important lesson was the understanding of how he perceives the human soul and human existence, which is relevant no matter what age we live in. It is in our nature to seek answers to certain questions. And Dostoevsky was absolutely well versed in this. He knew what suffering and struggle were. You know, sometimes we demand too much. Nothing seems right for us. But what actually is life? What is it to be happy? Absolutely all of his works are universal, because our questions remain the same. Who are we? What is our path in life? What is the meaning of life? What is it to do good? All of these things are universal. Therefore, Dostoevsky will always have many readers. Man is a mystery. It needs to be unraveled. And if you spend your whole life unraveling it, don't say that you've wasted time. I am studying that mystery because I want to be a human being.